This is Late Night Politics on Star FM, taking an in-depth look at the Zimbabwean political scene.
It's a Monday. Welcome to Late Night Politics. My name is George Musumba. Ever since she announced that she would be running for the Mount Pleasant National Assembly seat as an independent candidate in 2018, there's been mixed reactions, with some saying it is time that young, gifted men and women should now stand up and be counted, while some say the opposition vote is going to be split in favor of the ruling party. Some have labeled her as ZANU-PF proxy, while others say she's a breath of fresh air in the stuffy political room where the same old faces have been vegetating. Welcome to Late Night Politics, Advocate Fadzayi Mahere. I'll call you Fadzi.
Please go ahead, George. Thank you very much, and good evening to all your listeners.
Yes, you have done the rounds, the media rounds, and people have questioned. You have been in the papers, so this is more of a conversation to understand the thinking behind our newly minted candidate who's just entered politics. What is the motivation? What drives you?
Okay, so George, as you possibly have read, I've been on a journey over the last year or so of engagement with national policy, economic policy, a lot of socio-political issues. I have interfaced and, run a show where I've spoken to a number of politicians and public administrators, calling for them to, be accountable, less corrupt, and act in accordance with general notions of justice. I've also been very engaged with the political process and prospects for change in the real sense in Zimbabwe vis-a-vis the very tough issues that we face on a daily basis. Whether it's in bank queues, whether it's the potholes on the roads, poor service delivery, the homelessness that you see at every intersection, the failed public health, you would have seen the doctor strike. All of that has really brought me to a place where I'm noticing more and more that complaining on the sidelines is just not enough. Time is moving, and as Zimbabweans, we're great at playing that waiting game where you say, no, look, change is going to come, at some distant point in the future. And I said to myself, you know what, I don't want to be 40, 50, 60 and asking myself, gosh, why didn't I do more at the time that I could have? You criticize those who are, whether it's in parliament or in public office, and, sometimes you have to say, look, I want things a certain way. I have to be the change I want to see in the community and in the political space. Sometimes if I try and motivate or speak to those who are there and try and make them see things the way I do, sometimes they don't. So sometimes the most efficient thing to do is to go out there and actually run a campaign based on the issues the way you see it, because that's your only way of trying to see the change that you wish to. And that's really been my motivation in coming up to this decision to run for parliament. It hasn't been an easy one. You are stepping outside your comfort zone. Law is a very conservative practice. And now you're stepping out, you're, basically opening yourself out to public scrutiny. But I do think it's something necessary and something that I think, history will be kind to me ultimately for the decision that I've taken.
You term it the comfortable inaction, and a lot of young people maybe go through that. Perhaps you want to explain when you say comfortable inaction, complaining without taking action. How can you now motivate, especially the young people who are in this comfortable zone, but they don't want to take action?
Well, the fascinating thing, George, is that it's a comfortable zone of discomfort, because the young people are the people who are suffering the most from the failed political system, failed economy in Zimbabwe, because it's our prospects that are being diminished. I was saying to someone else that, look, our grandmothers and our parents saw trains and a functioning rail system and functioning public health, and we just don't have the same. When you hear your older generation nurses speaking of Andrew Fleming Hospital, which was the pride of Harare, Salisbury at the time, you just look at it now and you say, gosh, how did we get here? So I think the biggest motivation I can give to the young is that, look, we're going to have to be accountable to our children and to the next generation. And, if Zimbabwe continues along the path that it's on now, in 10 years, 20 years time, we're looking at a very, very, very dark prospect. We need to step out and change the course the country is on, as it were. The young people, if you've got a president who's 93, he's not too bothered about the next 5 years. It's people who are 18, people who are 20, people who are 30, who are able to look out into the distance and say, look, what Zimbabwe do we want 20 or 30 years from now? We've got a vested interest in the future. And if we don't want to be people who are, constantly trying to leave and get out of the toxified ecosystem, we have to do something about it now. No one's going to come and rescue us. No one's going to come and be our salvation. We literally have to rescue ourselves out of this mess.
It has been a mystery even to other African nations why Zimbabweans don't take action. Have you taken time to study this phenomena, that why don't Zimbabweans want to take charge of their destiny? Our parents took charge in the 70s and they went to war and they liberated Zimbabwe. But as far as getting the young people now to take action, it's a bit difficult. Have you taken time to study why is it that the young people don't want to take action?
Thank you very much, George. I actually have. And I've spoken to lots of people and I've seen some of where the problem lies. Obviously, it's very intricate. But a lot of the time, people do actually want to rise up. People do want to speak out. But the environment, the political environment, is one where there's always a violent state response, where young people, where, anyone who is sort of active tries to rise up. You don't need anyone to remind you of what happened last year. When people try to demonstrate, the police come out, they throw their tear gas all over the place, water cannons, beatings, trumped up arrests and charges, people sleeping in jail. You've got the case of Fadzayi Mahere, who disappeared very mysteriously. All of that builds a culture of fear in the people, which the state then very cleverly plays on, that, people are very hesitant to step outside their homes because they don't want to lose their lives. You also see a very, harsh response from the government on people's businesses, on people's personal affairs, on people's private lives. And people say, look, I don't want to risk my business for sticking my neck out. And, this is very, very real. The fear that pervades our society is, one of the saddest things. And that's possibly what accounts for people not rising up. Speaking of the generation ahead of us, they still have memories of the war firmly etched in their minds. You've got people in Matabeleland who are still, thinking very seriously about Gukurahundi and the effect that it has. So all of that violence has really damaged the psyche of the population and made people afraid to speak out because they don't know what implications exist. And as far as how the state response. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that people don't want to rise up. They do, and they do try. But you're always met with, a night in jail is enough for you to say, look, I'm not going to protest anymore, no matter how strongly you feel about an issue. If you get beaten by the police, if you see a family member disappear, you don't want to put your children at risk if you've got children. All that has really worked together to create this attitude where, people would rather just, stay in their homes, be quote unquote safe, and apathy. They don't want their hopes dashed. They'd rather just stay away from the situation. And I think that's an indictment on our government, to treat people in that way to a point where they can't stand up for themselves. It's quite sad.
The apathy that you talk about, it's one of the hurdles that you probably have to overcome because you are running in Mount Pleasant.
Yes.
How are you going to get the people now to say, okay, let me be involved?
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you my whole strategy, George, because obviously we can't. But I will say this, one thing that is missing from our political space is just a message of hope and inspiration and a vision for the amazing Zimbabwe we know is possible. And if you speak to 17-year-olds, I do a lot of talks in schools, speak to a lot of young people. I speak to the students at the university. One thing that seems to be completely absent is hope. people don't have hope, people don't have inspiration. The closer we get to elections, the more people are, filled with despair, apathy. Gosh, who do I vote for? Is there space for me? Can I get involved? No, none of the candidates are inspiring me. I haven't seen my MP for the last 5 or 10 years. I have no idea who my councillor is. They keep, using me to get in, but my garbage hasn't been collected for the last 10 years. So we really want to lead a campaign that's, inspires hope and a thirst for change. And we want to get people involved. We don't want the discussion around the electoral process to remain an elite conversation amongst formal politicians. We want community-led solutions to a lot of the problems that the communities face. For example, I spoke of homelessness. If the community comes together and takes care of those who are homeless in their communities, will go a long way. If the businesses that are within the constituency can come together, form a network, create a forum where they, incubate other smaller businesses, create a tech hub. A lot of people have come forward with various solutions and initiatives for the constituency of Mount Pleasant. Someone wants to offer, free coding for any child who's 10 years and over. Someone has come up with a program where, they want to sponsor a tech hive and an incubator within the constituency. Someone has come forward and said, look, I want to lay a pavement on that street that stretches across a College Road in Mount Pleasant where the UZ is, so that people have a smooth footpath. So the community wants to be involved in making Mount Pleasant greener, safer, cleaner. People have come up with initiatives of how we can deal with crime as a community, not leave it all to the police, where, we build a network with the police, but we also have our neighborhood watches. People are talking about how, we should plant trees along the streets, things that the community itself can get involved in. And all you need is, just the change, the shift in mindset, where we've got that pride as the constituency of Mount Pleasant, where we buy local. If you're going to have a cup of coffee, you frequent a Mount Pleasant constituency coffee shop. If you're going to buy something, if you're going to frequent a business, if you're going to hire, you hire local, creating that pride within the community. And you'll see people's attitudes change. You want people who walk around the constituency to have a spring in their step, to pick up litter and just have a self-policing mechanism. This comes about when people know that they're working towards building something within their community, and that's been completely missing. And that's some of what we want to do. We want to get people to participate, people to get involved. We want people to feel that their voice matters. We want people to know that they can hold even their local authorities to account. We can't have a situation where we go first week, second week, third week, fourth week without the garbage being collected. We need to ask the councillor, look, what are you doing? We're not letting you go. We're going to dump this litter at your gate if, this goes on for another week. We can't let it go on for a month, 2 months, without collecting the garbage. We simply don't want that as a constituency. So things like that are things we want to work on.
Now, Fadzayi, looking at Mount Pleasant, is it just one homogeneous society? Because sometimes you'll find that the voters, when it comes to Mount Pleasant, the voters, you will have the maids, the garden workers and so forth, and then you also have the other the homeowners themselves. How are you going to be able to bridge that message so that you also appeal to the other?
Thank you very much. Thank you, George. I think, as you've pointed out, Mount Pleasant is a beautiful and a diverse community. You've got all sorts. You've got business, you've got big business, small business, you've got homeowners, you've got, our support staff. We have gone into all those communities so far. And one of the big things that's on the minds of, our support staff who are possibly within the lower income bracket, they've highlighted two things. The first thing is the need for continuous education. So we do want to sponsor a program where we can ensure that everyone has at least an O-level certificate with 5 O-levels on it. So it doesn't matter how old you are. Let's try on that continuous self-improvement tip, and also helping them again with, computer lessons, things just to improve their lot. One of the other things that the community at that level spoke of is the lack of a maternity clinic within the Mount Pleasant constituency area. Now, you'll know that there are two district clinics in Mount Pleasant constituency. You've got the one at Bond Street in Mount Pleasant, and the one at Emerald Hill. Now, they're decrying the fact that there are no maternity services at either of those clinics. So if, someone's giving birth, and, the wife of a gardener or, the cleaning lady, you find that she has to travel all the way to Warren Park or Hatcliffe, and they're saying the cost of this is just too high. So we want to drive a program where we ensure that there are maternity services within the district clinics in Mount Pleasant. And so, yes, absolutely, we've spoken to every section of the community. We've heard the students, and we'll continue to do so. We are currently at the meet the people, connecting with the community phase. This is a 3-month program where we go door to door, knocking on people's doors, hearing what their concerns are, hearing what they're going to do. Instead of just asking, what's your MP going to do for you? Also ask yourself, what are you going to do for the community? Hearing what the topical issues are, because, the tendency of formal politicians is to prescribe to the community that you must do this, or I'm going to do this for you. Hear from the people themselves, show them that their voice counts, so that when you go into the National Assembly, you're truly representing the interests of the people, as opposed to sharing your opinions to the august house.
Running as an independent, you are entering a political system which is heavily polarized. You are going to get brickbats from the ruling party. You are going to get brickbats from the opposition parties. How are you going to find your space there?
Thank you, George.
Yes.
I love the way you say you're going to, as if it hasn't started already. They are really having a party, taking turns to throw the uppercut, and it's been fascinating. And you spoke of polarization. That's precisely the problem. Where constantly all we hear from our politicians is, and they're constantly, if you read the Hansard, you know what the Hansard is, right? Where they have a transcript of the conversations in Parliament. And we don't want that. We want the issues to be discussed. We don't want a situation where everything degenerates into a discussion about which political party or which political system you're from, or towing the political line. You have to, at some point, bring the conversation back to the issues, make the issues mainstream, talk about the bank queues. We had this huge campaign last year trying to stop bond notes. What was fascinating to me, George, is the fact that parliamentarians, in the face of an announcement that's clearly unlawful, were quiet. You didn't hear a discussion in Parliament about the bond notes issue. They only start debating a legal framework after Mangujge introduced the bond notes. What's the point of that? That displays a weak Parliament. Currently, we've got an issue with the Electoral Act. You've got an electoral act that's not aligned with the Constitution, and it's been this way since the 22nd of May 2013, when the Constitution was enacted. Why'd you wait 4 years doing nothing about the Electoral Act, debating all sorts of other, less efficient pieces of legislation and leaving this out? Where was the member who sponsored a piece of legislation to amend the Electoral Act? Right now, you've got the question of biometric voter registration. And you'll find that the legal framework that exists right now doesn't support that. What are the parliamentarians doing? We don't want a situation where we implement biometric voter registration only to find halfway that it's invalid. And I'm sorry, I'm a stickler for the law. So I look into these things. I'm fully aware of the demands of the Constitution. I know what the legislation contains. And we seem just either we don't have the political will from the current parliamentarians, or they don't have the technical competence. You'll find parliamentarians go for a whole year without saying a word. It's been widely reported. Sometimes, you'll hear Mr. Mudenda decrying the fact that Parliament has failed to sit because they simply don't show up. That's not good enough. And the same people are asking for a price hike in their salaries. The same people are just nowhere to be found in their communities. There's no development to show for their representation. Can we continue to keep voting in those people? So
the question that you are asking the political parties, because probably if you make it to Parliament, you'll be one of the few. Where are the political parties making the mistake in choosing candidates. How should they choose candidates?
Okay,
the party system, and you are going obviously as an independent,
yes.
which is okay for you because
yes.
you have put yourself up there.
Yes.
But the political system within the party, where is the weakness there in choosing the candidates?
Thank you very much, George. The weakness is that the candidates that they impose are candidates who don't have a connection with the community. Right now, the MP for Mount Pleasant is meant to be a gentleman called Jason Passad. Not once have I seen this man. The only thing, I actually went online and I was like, let me try and find out what he's done. You know, and what you find is he's had a beauty pageant. Quite frankly, in a constituency as big as Mount Pleasant, with the issues that it faces, that's not good enough. You know, we want someone who comes back to us. Right now in Parliament, discuss these are the key things. Kune public hearing yakati, rukuitwa muswa kati, indaikwa kati. You don't hear that. No connection whatsoever. So the trouble is, varikuti pavanu vasingatimire. If you go right now to Harare South, just go pama flats apa, pama tapi apa. You'll be shocked. Who is the MP there, quite frankly? Marara anuita hip. It's just not good enough. So they need to get MPs who deliver. That's what the political parties need to do. MPs who can speak to the issues. MPs who are willing to meet their constituents. That's what we want, and that's what they're failing to do every time. And the media is guilty of this as well. All we hear is Kasukwere and Hot Soup, Jonathan Moyo and Chiwenga fighting. We don't hear anybody talking about the daily struggles that we face as Zimbabweans. No one is making the problem of bank queues an electoral issue. Nobody is making unemployment an electoral issue. Nobody is making the failed economy an electoral issue. You cannot win like that. You cannot expect me to vote for you so that you just keep getting allowances and you don't serve me. It's just not good enough. And as for ZANU-PF itself, it's the biggest culprit. They've got a majority in parliament and they don't care about the people. That's not good enough.
If we go to 2018 with the current scenario, how do you see Zimbabwe? Do you see it continuing? Do you see the youth staying, or are you in a position to be still there if ZANU-PF or MDC get the majority, and yet you say the quality of the legislators are just not up there?
Yeah, no, the quality of the legislators is deplorable. That said, I think my call to the youth is we need to get involved. Because we're the people who are going to suffer if the country continues on the path it's on, like I indicated. So what we need to do is to get involved. We're going to be very disappointed. We need to get in. And this attitude of just using the youth as running dogs, kuti kana makuda kumobilizirwa vanhu, kana makuda kuitirwa social media, kana makuda vanhu vanorova vanhu, ndopa munodedza mayouth, and yet mu Politburo hamuna mayouth, and yet mu National Committee MDC hamuna young people. You need to start taking the voice of young people seriously. We need to be right there in parliament. You know, someone said to me the other day, I know, Fadz, you've got your whole life ahead of you. Wadi kumbotangira kuma councils. Now, there's nothing wrong with working in council, but why can't young people sit in parliament? Mm-hmm. If you've got the competence, and if we are the biggest demographic and you're calling us all to vote, that vote has to translate into a meaningful voice. That vote has to come with some sort of power. You can't just use us for your ends, and yet we aren't able to represent ourselves. And that's precisely what's motivating my bid to run for Parliament in Mount Pleasant.
Your relationship with the MDCT,
yes.
How is it like?
It's great.
It's great.
So a lot of the people in the MDC, are people that I get along with, that I've spoken to. You'll note that we're doing a class action right now to try and get voter registration on. We've been in consultation with our members of the MDC. We've had conversations with the spokesperson and members of the MDC. The relationship is good. And I want to emphasize beyond any doubt, George, that our enemy is not the MDC. Our enemy is ZANU-PF, which is the ruling party that's got us into this mess. We as a campaign are not fighting sideways. We've got the utmost respect for the MDC, and anyone who says anything contrary to that is not from our campaign. They're fabricating fake news. We have the utmost respect for every single opposition political party, including the MDC.
But
and that's something that should be fostered.
Bets have come from that side.
Yeah, I mean,
there's vote splitting, and they've labeled you a proxy that your parents, your father was in ZANU-PF, therefore you are just gonna get the votes and run back to ZANU-PF and so forth.
Well, throwing those sort of attacks is something that's quite natural in politics. And, what I love the most about myself is that I don't break. I think at the core of the opposition right now is the need to unite against a common enemy, ZANU-PF. We throw all sorts of blows at the system because we don't know which one will be the fatal one. As for the charge of vote splitting, the parliamentarian that I'm up against is the ZANU-PF one. So it won't make sense to suggest that I'm splitting the vote there. We're not out to split the vote. We're out to win the vote. We want to win it outright. We don't want a small chunk of the vote in that regard. Coming to my parents, my father, you say he's a ZANU-PF politician. We need to get the facts straight there. He was a civil servant until retirement. He worked in the Ministry of Education. He's never run for political office for ZANU-PF or on a ZANU-PF ticket. He hasn't sat in any of the main, organs of the ruling party. And so this is something that obviously the media is just drumming up and, creating some sort of suspicion. But really what we need to do as politicians who are opposed to ZANU-PF is to come together and to fight the common enemy, which is ZANU-PF. And that's precisely what's going to be done. We're not going to fight sideways. We're going to fight forwards and unite against the single enemy that's ZANU-PF.
Within a week of announcing your entry into politics, a lot of attention has come onto you. Are you prepared to live in a glass bowl where everything that you do is going to be nitpicked?
No, people can nitpick all they want. And you know what, George? I'm looking forward to a new political culture where people go and ask, look, who's my MP? Let me start nitpicking him. Let me start asking, where are you? Where have you been? What do you stand for? What's your ideology? What's your service plan? What's your promise for the election? Where have you been? What do you have integrity? Those questions must be asked. And you should not stop at just asking Fadzayi. You must ask every single person. And every single person who holds themselves out for public office in Zimbabwe must open themselves out to scrutiny. And I'm absolutely up to the task because I've got the ability to say to myself, look, this is not worth responding to. This is a digression. This is a red herring. I've got the ability to focus on the key issues. And so, the conspiracy theories can absolutely go ahead, but we're going to set about the important business of getting Mount Pleasant constituency working again and to start regenerating our community from the top all the way to the bottom.
Okay, finally, Fadzi, entering politics as a woman, it's a whole. If you go to parliament, they always complain about the sexism there. Any women that have inspired you to run this path, what is the message for the other young ladies who might want also to enter the political fray?
Okay, so there are lots of women who inspire me locally, regionally and internationally. In our own parliament, you've got Jessie Majome, who does a fantastic job of communicating with her constituency and, participating. She's got the legal competence as well, so she's a huge inspiration. Within the region, the other politicians as well. In South Africa, you've got Lindiwe, who was formerly with the DA, very strong woman, very powerful voice. And then internationally, you've got, the obvious Angela Merkels, the Hillary Clintons, the Theresa Mays, women who really, in the face of a lot of misogyny, a lot of personal attacks, a lot of, discrimination, as it were, and a political culture that's not always respectful of women, have managed to rise above and continue to get the job done. they certainly inspire me. And so I say the same thing to young women who want to get involved in politics. Let's grow thick skin. Let's speak out against any sort of misogyny. When whether it's men or women start making an issue of our bodily images, we need to speak out very clearly against that. When people start, raising your marital status as an election issue, something that's completely irrelevant to your ability to serve a community, we must denounce that. When the Herald starts speaking of Joyce Mujuru as a sex object, we have to say that's completely wrong. We have to come out with a forceful public outcry and denounce that. But we also must have the mental fortitude to keep going, because we've got an important job to do, and we must do it, because the women electorate, the women always bear the brunt of failed government policy, and so we must be at the forefront of trying to fix it.
Thank you, Fadzi, for coming through to Late Night Politics. I know I had promised the listeners that we will bring her so that she talks about her aspirations, what drives her. And we have just been having a conversation with Fadzayi Mahere. She's an advocate, and she will be running in Mount Pleasant as an independent candidate in 2018. And we can only wish her the best, and we hope other young people have been inspired. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you very much for having me over, George, and thank you very much to your listeners for tuning in. God bless.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Late Night Politics on Star FM, taking an in-depth look at the Zimbabwean political scene. Join us again next week, Monday, same time on Star FM. Tune in to Star FM every Monday night for Late Night Politics, brought to you by Star FM News and Current Affairs. From 11 p.m. till midnight for riveting, engaging political discussions. Meet Zimbabwe's political players as they square off live on Zimbabwe's leading radio station. Your Monday late nights will never be the same again. Late Night Politics on Star FM, leading the pack and sounding good all the time. You've been listening to Late Night Politics on Star FM, taking an in-depth look at the Zimbabwean political scene. Join us again next week, Monday, same time on Star FM.